How is technology affecting the writing process? Are authors having to shift the focus from the story to the platform?
I don't think it's about what anyone has to do. It's not much, there's more responsibilities, and I think just straight novels are still going to totally exist, and I certainly hope they will, and I think they will. It's more that there's a new set of possibilities, I think, that these technologies open up. That said, I think when you're writing for one of these new platforms, I mean that kind of broad sense of, a story with a new shape, it's important that the content and the story really be aware of that shape and be written with that shape in mind. Often when things are kind of disappointing is when there's a story that's written to be maybe just a straight novel, and then it gets kind of crammed in after the fact to some different technological shape. It's best if these two things can evolve together and the story really understands its form as it's being created, the form and the content are interacting. So that is a different experience, but I think it can be a productive one. It raises new questions. And like with the silent history, for example, it's a daily serialization, which forced us to think about plotting in a different way and forced us to have kind of very frequent payoffs and cliffhangers and think about what the readers can experience each day. And those are values that are important in any story, page-turneriness.
Sure.
But the form sort of highlighted those things in a helpful way that sort of reacquainted us with those priorities, I guess.
Right. So along those lines, and you already sort of touched on this a little bit, but how is technology affecting the narrative, the stories themselves?
Yeah, I think it depends. It's not just, to me, I don't see technology as monolithic in that sense. So however technology is being used can affect it in a different way. So in the case of our project, the serialization was a big part of it, and that sort of gave us some greater sensitivity towards plot and towards where the reader's going to be or should be at each particular plot, where they're going to be after this day, after this week, after this month.
Right.
A different kind of sensitivity to that. And then for us, the other aspect of the project was geography. There's all these site-specific elements to the story. So thinking about how the story and the physical world interact and how every story kind of occurs within a physical setting and impacts that setting. We took that in very literal senses of like it actually uses like the scrapes in the pavement or the windows overhead.
Right.
But on a broader level, that's always true. I mean, sometimes everything that happens occurs within a setting, and when you're fully in the world of a story, of writing a story, you can almost blind yourself so that you can forget about that external reality. But this was a useful reminder of those things. But in other kinds of digital fiction, it could be something totally different, and I think that's what's important, is not to think of like technology as some like demanding God who just sort of says now all fiction is going to be like this. It's just a new set of tools, and it can take you in all sorts of different directions.
Right. So more authors are experimenting with reader participation in narrative development, kind of crowdsourcing the storytelling, and you did that a little bit in the silent history. What are the pros and cons of that approach?
Well, for us, the reason for it was, in the genesis of the project, it had nothing to do with even audience participation or engagement or anything. It was just that we needed this kind of geographic spread of the work, and there's no way, so it's in 250 spots around the country and around the world. I couldn't go to all these places, much less create all that content.
Right.
So I just had someone in Norway send something in, and now we're in Norway.
Yeah.
So it was just a practical solution to a practical problem. It is neat, all those other things too, that it does create a new level of audience engagement and a new way to express your excitement about a work. I only sort of see it as something new. It's more just that it's easier now. I mean, in a way, I link it to when I was at McSweeney's. I was editing a literary journal, and there's always a crossover between your readers and your writers, and someone will read for a long time and then submit, or the vice versa. And so for the silent history, it's more of a community of creators and writers. When I hear crowdsourcing, that feels to me more like a wiki or something, where it's just like an organism on its own, and that can have its value definitely, but it also often doesn't necessarily make a good story. A story that's sort of a pure expression of a consciousness or something, which is I think what we look to art for and literature for. So it was important for us. It was solving a very specific problem, and it went well. It was fun. It was also a real challenge to come up with a very precise set of guidelines that really set people up to succeed and integrate it with the project well. If I just said, hey, just write something, send it in.
Right.
If we had just published all of it, it would have been terrible. And if we had been very choosy about it, we would have had to reject almost all of it.
Sure.
But so I really honed the guidelines and tried them out on a lot of different people to see what's a fair challenge, and how to, exactly what role should it play in the project.
And how do you filter the submissions?
Just old-fashioned, just like I read them and
you look at them.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I try and make them better. Send feedback to the writers.
Right.
Sometime, if it got huge, that might be a problem.
Right.
But if it got huge, it'd be a good problem.
Right.
And they could get help or something.
Right.
I do think we're not anywhere near replacing, or never, like editing and curating and attention to detail, attention to quality is always going to be a useful thing. I don't think just turning it over, it's just like a fully self-regulating marketplace of text or something.
Right.
I don't think it's got its uses, but it's not what we were looking for.
Yeah. The silent history is almost more of a production than a publication. Is that the future of storytelling?
Well, it's a collaboration, definitely. I don't know about the future of storytelling as a whole, but projects like this often inherently require some level of collaboration. But and to me, that was exciting. I mean, definitely the silent history is something. There were basically 4 of us that made it: myself and 2 writers and 1 developer. And it became something bigger and better than any of us could have done alone, and also more fun than any of us could have done alone. I see this as potentially a role for publishers in the future, as certain parts of their traditional role become kind of obsolete. This is actually a new viable role. Because in that sense, writing has always been collaborative, because you wrote it, someone else laid it out, someone else printed it, someone else distributed it, someone else sold it,
Right.
So some of that stuff is actually collapsing, becoming a smaller production than it was. And I mean, it was 4 of us, but it was really just the 4 of us.
Sure.
And, the whole iTunes store or whatever. But so that way it's actually much slimmer than it was. But I do think the collaborations are important, and having them be really baked into the DNA of the project from the beginning, so that the text and the content and the technology and the format and the design are all evolving in unison, shaping each other, rather than being primarily a story that you kind of cram into a digital box, or primarily some sort of newfangled platform that you go look for something to stick into it.
Right.
So the more intimate those collaborations are, the better.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for chatting with me today.
Thanks for having me.